In 2006, a major epidemic of dengue fever broke out in French Guiana. After the chikungunya virus on Reunion Island, this was the second serious viral epidemic to hit the French territories in less than 1 year. In Cayenne, Dr. Eggman and his colleagues are doing their utmost to respond to this emergency. The virus has infected nearly 16,000 people and caused 4 deaths. For some years now, viruses have alarmed the scientific community. New viruses appear regularly, and those that were thought to be under control return with new virulence. Most of these viruses have one thing in common. They all turn up from the depth of the tropical forests. To better fight these viruses, and above all to learn to recognize new ones, scientists are venturing deep into virgin tropical forests. Their objective is to anticipate what they call the accidents of life. In October 2006, a group of scientists and adventurers leave for a 3-week trip into the heart of the forest of Guyana. All of these men have made many such expeditions in the past. Among this group is Hugues Contamin, a former researcher for Pasteur Guyana who has also collaborated with the P4 laboratory in Lyon. He's here to look for viruses. With him is Jean-Philippe Champenois, an insect specialist. He's here to look for new remedies. Gerald Eggman, the head of the Cayenne Emergency Medical Unit, is also part of the team. He's the doctor in charge. Located on the Atlantic coast of South America, French Guiana is a vast territory, composed of 90% primary tropical forest. The numerous rivers that cut through these forests provide the only access. In the south, there is a zone that is practically unexplored. To go into this area, special authorization must be obtained from the government. Our scientists are headed into the heart of this region, close to the Brazilian border in the Tumacumac Mountains. The scientists' objective is to study the microorganisms, viruses or parasites, that circulate here. In the heart of what is sometimes called green hell, they're in search of the invisible. For some years now, viral outbreaks have made headlines in the international press, and for good reason. Today, viruses can spread around the planet at the speed of a jet airplane. That's how chikungunya swept through the entire Indian Ocean before ending up in India, or that SARS spread from Asia to Canada in just a few hours. Scientists are very concerned, because after Africa and Asia, and the threat of SARS, Ebola, or H5N1 avian flu, new viruses that are just as dangerous are appearing in the Amazon basin of the South American continent. The expedition continues, another 5-day journey before reaching the Tumacumac Mountains. For these researchers, there's no such thing as zero risk. They know that they can become infected by coming into contact with microorganisms, but they have taken all the precautions possible to prevent this. In general, new viruses appear when man makes repeated incursions into zones where microorganisms circulate.
We can get our packs ready. I can pass those things to you. I'll pass you your gear.
Today, the biggest risk for scientists is the increased contact between man and viruses. Because man is pushing deeper and deeper into these zones to make a living, to hunt, grow crops, fish, cut trees, or, as in Guyana, to hunt for gold. The more deforestation, the more risk of the emergence of new viruses.
In 1998, near here, in an Indian village, I was brought in to take care of a woman who had a fever and whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. We took her back to Cayenne. She seemed to get worse by the minute. And above all, she started bleeding all over. From the needle marks where we'd try to put in a drip, from everywhere. For example, she bled from the nose and eyes. Even her vomit was full of blood, diffuse bleeding. She literally bled to death. She died of shock from hemorrhaging caused by that infection. It turned out that this patient died of yellow fever. It was the first case diagnosed since 1902. There you have the exact definition of a re-emerging disease. We knew that there was yellow fever in South America, but there hadn't been a single case diagnosed in Guyana since 1902. This is why we're interested in getting ahead of it by going into these unfamiliar virgin territories to take a census of the potential diseases out there. That's the reason for the expedition.
This census of potential microorganisms will be largely carried out by Hugues Contamin, the veterinarian.
What I'm interested in are emerging illnesses that come from out of the forest. We know they infect forest animals. For me, what's interesting is to find those animals, generally rodents and bats, to take a blood sample and do a genetic analysis in the laboratory. Then we can look at the various elements to see if there are traces of viruses that could one day infect man.
Although this expedition is special, it isn't the first. All of the participants have had a great deal of experience in the forest, which is a big plus for Eric Pellet, the group leader.
As of today, we've done about 70 kilometers as the crow flies, but we've got another 40 to go. We're a long way from any point of contact. So it's important that everybody be pretty autonomous, able to react to any problem, avoid big mistakes. This is the Amazon, and there are things you have to know. You can put it all down on paper and say, be careful of this and that. But there's nothing like experience on this kind of expedition. I try to get into isolated areas like this at least once a year, so that I can enjoy the calm, the purity of these places. It's like a retreat. You return to the simple life, to the essential pleasures. And whether it's water and the simple taste of food, and recognizing your basic needs.
Simplement suffire à ses besoins basiques.
We have to be careful of the viruses. We run the same risk as the forestry workers who come through these virgin areas and are confronting the unknown. I've often been in rainforests, and it's always the same sensation, the same feeling. You're completely disconnected from everyday life, from the world. And it's extraordinary to experience this in today's world. It's a real pleasure that I want to share.
In his laboratory at the Faculty of Châtenay-Malabry, Jean-Charles Gantier studies a special insect, the sandfly. Found in Latin America, and especially in Guyana, this tiny animal, only 2 millimeters long, is the host for a parasitic illness called leishmaniasis that causes great damage in tropical countries.
It's an insect that has 2 wings, so it's a diptera. It has this characteristic hump, and it's an insect with incredibly long legs. They're almost twice the length of the body. Some mosquitoes also have very long legs, but these are exceptionally long compared to the size of the body.
During previous expeditions in southern Guyana, organized by Eric Pellet, some of the participants returned with leishmaniasis. So there may be new species of sandflies to discover in the Tumacumac region. This is one insect that Charles Gantier will be hunting for in southern Guyana when he joins the expedition.
It will enrich our knowledge of the types of sandflies that are of medical interest. Then to get into areas where no scientific work has been done before. That's very exciting.
We are going to clear a helicopter landing pad. The helicopter will bring the supplies this far, since we're a long way from Cayenne. We couldn't all leave from Cayenne because it would have meant a lot of trips back and forth. 5 trips, actually. And with such a long distance, in terms of fuel supply and even cost, it just wasn't feasible. So we got our personnel and 2 tons of supplies this far. Then the helicopter will do what we call a frog jump, covering the 24 kilometers that separate us here from the boundary marker 1.
Established by the geographer REAU, boundary marker 1 marks the border between France and Brazil in the heart of an area that even today remains completely untouched.
I'm just going over there to take some samples, to see if there are any parasites.
Hugues takes his first sample. While the landing pad is being finished, the Indians that accompanied the group from Talouenne have gone hunting and have brought back 2 peccaries. Hugues is especially looking for what are called virus reservoirs, that is, rodents and bats. But the blood of the peccary might also have secrets to reveal. Who knows?
Donc Maïté, si j'ai bien retenu.
So, the first fixing solution.
3 seconds in the methanol. Under the microscope, you can observe the blood compartments and see if there are any little parasites circulating in the bloodstream of these species. This is a field laboratory.
Do you have enough paraffin?
Not a lot, but go ahead. This is the little drop of blood for molecular analysis in the laboratory. It's put on a small membrane that resembles blotting paper, which is treated with a product that inactivates the virus. Any existing virus would thus be killed. We'll analyze the traces of DNA in any microorganism that we find.
Les traces d'ADN d'un éventuel micro-organisme.
Ramenez les touques, les gars. Les sacs, les touques.
On va faire 3 rotations.
We're going to get to boundary marker 1 in 3 stages. We load the helicopter with as much as we can. The personnel and the supplies, it's all got to fit.
How are you?
Good. And you?
It's fantastic.
Morning, how's everybody?
Morning, Chief.
On its way to pick up the team, the helicopter had first dropped off Jean-Charles Gantier at Boundary 1. The group is now complete.
J'avais 3 nuits avant, c'était long, hein. Long.
Alors, mais là, on est tous bien contents de se retrouver là. On va installer un camp de base un petit peu plus
We'll make
bas,
base camp a little lower down, near a small river, so we have water.
Et puis à partir d'ici, donc on va rayonner.
And then from there we'll fan out to get our rodents and insect samples.
Sur les petits rongeurs, les prélèvements d'insectes.
Everything will be done in this area within a radius of 2 to 3 kilometers.
De 2-3 kilomètres, quoi.
This area had already been partly explored by Eric Pellet. And it's in this region that some members of the preceding expeditions caught the germs or parasites, but showed no signs of it until after their return from the forest. For some of them, this necessitated lengthy hospitalization. Life in the rainforest has its risks.
Ça va être là le camp de base.
This is going to be our base camp.
Le fond est sablonneux.
The little river's nice. It has sandy soil and easy access.
Puis le terrain est plat.
It's flat ground.
Le seul désavantage, c'est
The only disadvantage is that during the rainy season it floods and it becomes spongy.
assez spongieux, mais là, comme on est
But since it's the dry season now, it's no problem. It's good terrain. It'll work out. I think it'll make a nice camp.
On va faire avec. Je pense que ça peut faire un camp sympa.
In addition to parasite, virus, and insect specialists, another scientist joins the group by helicopter. Gerald Mijon heads the Regional Archaeological Service of Guyana. While his colleagues try to capture the invisible, he will look for signs of former human habitation in this region. It is estimated that in the past there were between 50 and 200,000 Indians in the territory that is now French Guiana. Today there are less than 7,000, and one of the main reasons for their almost complete extermination was the microorganisms brought from the Old World by the Europeans, what we call bacterial shock.
The bacterial shock during the conquest was a double shock. That is, the American Indians were infected by the diseases of the Old World and vice versa. But obviously it was the Indians, who had been isolated from the rest of the world for 50,000 years, that suffered the most from the shock. The main sicknesses were smallpox, measles, the plagues, and cholera that were present in the Old World.
It is estimated that 90% of the native peoples of this region were wiped out by this, a disaster. And this kind of pandemic has always existed. One such catastrophic event swept through the entire world in 1918. It is estimated that the Spanish flu virus killed between 40 and 100 million people. The only difference today is that when an epidemic begins, it can spread around the planet even more rapidly. And it's exactly this sort of pandemic that worries certain members of the scientific community today. If such a virus reappeared today, it would cause a much bigger catastrophe. After having hit Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean, the chikungunya, for example, rapidly infected 1 million people in India. In Africa, the Ebola virus remains a mystery. Where it originates is still unknown. AIDS, the pioneer of emerging viruses, still ravages the world. It has infected 40 million people. And with H5N1, avian flu, the worst may be yet to come.
This looks like a good place. Let's put a receptacle every 10 meters and start to dig. We're in the process of setting up a series of traps for small animals. The object is to take samples from all the small animals that fall into this hole. These can be frogs or toads, snakes, small rodents, or small opossums. This area is interesting because it's an equatorial tropical forest in an area where samples have never been taken. We're the first to do this, and this is of great interest to all of the scientists who work on these species, whether they specialize in frogs, snakes, or rodents. This study will enable them to discover the concentration of these species in the area and how they've evolved over the course of time, what we call the phylogeography, the genetics of species. Here we've just put the tarps over the receptacles that are placed all along for about 100 meters. Then we'll cover the bottom of the tarp with earth to constitute the trap that will lure the animals into the receptacles.
The trap is set. Hugues checks it one last time. To capture the rodents that he needs, he knows that nothing must be left to chance. Meanwhile, Jean-Charles Gantier goes into the forest by himself to hunt sandflies. His objective is to capture several thousands, and he has only 10 days on the site to meet his quota.
A sandfly is a small insect, a small diptera, with a special characteristic. Only the female insect does the biting, thus the name phlebotome. Tomos means to cut, and phlebos means vein. The female pierces the veins and sucks up the blood. It's a very special zoological group that we've come across for a long time, in fossils and in amber. There's an explosion of them on the American continent, where we are certain that there are more than 400 species out of the approximately 800 in the world. So half of the species are endemic to the American continent. In principle, capturing small nocturnal insects in the forest is fairly simple. You use a light source. Next, once the insects are attracted, they are sucked up by a ventilator at the base. And then they are collected in a net at the bottom, where they will remain all night. We recover the net the next morning and then study the insects that are inside.
Right now, it's impossible to see them. This animal is shy. It only comes out after dark to eat and usually doesn't live very far from its food supply.
Theoretically, this tree isn't a favorable place for sandflies to proliferate. But the existence of an active nest behind it suggests that there will be a great quantity of sandflies coming out tonight. And we'll probably have some in the trap tomorrow morning.
For Jean-Philippe Champenois, the entomologist of the group, it's also time to go hunting. Armed with a simple butterfly net, he's on his way to make a first inventory of the insects that inhabit this area.
When I first came to Guyana, I began to study all the fauna. It's very exciting here. With such a concentration of animal life, I started focusing on insects. Theirs is an incredible world that thrives in all environments. They are just as present in the air as in the earth and the water. In fossils, they found dragonflies that were over 1 meter 20 long, and they have traveled on down through the ages. The dragonfly is still here, the mosquito is still here, and I think they will outlast us.
Jean-Philippe uses several techniques to capture insects, and some of them simply consist of using traps similar to those found in nature.
This netting is a superfine mesh that was devised to catch insects in the vineyards. The principle is very simple. It works like a spider web. It's pure interception. The insect has only to hit the surface. We catch mostly beetles with it. We estimate that 60 to 80% of insects are yet to be discovered, and a study has shown that there were more than 3 tons of insects per hectare. That's a colossal amount. When you look around, you don't necessarily see many of them, but when you think of all the kinds of ants, termites, and everything you can't see above in the trees, these represent enormous quantities.
Jean-Philippe isn't here solely to discover new specimens. Unlike Jean-Charles or Hugues, he's not here to study a parasite or a virus. He's on this expedition because the forest not only conceals great dangers, but may also reveal their remedies.
We've begun to take an interest in insects in terms of their molecular immune systems. There are no illnesses in insects, so they have something that protects them. We've done many studies on plants, and now we're beginning to study the insects that interact with these plants. This could be the beginning of new molecules for pharmaceuticals.
pour des applications pharmaceutiques.
Early morning on the 10th day, everyone gathers at the top of boundary marker 1 to see an amazing sight that occurs only today and only here in French Guiana. Hugues checks on the traps. At first glance, the receptacles seem to be full, but the animals inside are not the ones he was expecting. Of all 10 traps set on the flank of this hill, not one contains a rodent.
Actually, there's nothing of interest here for me today. What I really need are small rodents. Last night it rained a lot, so I'm not sure that the larger animals were out at all. Now we'll just have to wait. That's why we're here.
Results of the first day of trapping for Hugues: 3 unknown lizards and 2 frogs. Jean-Charles is also in suspense as he checks his traps. But from the very first, he's in for a surprise.
Hundreds of sandflies. Everything that's flying around or lodged in the folds, it's all sandflies. This is an ecological niche for sandflies, not to mention all those on the bottom. There are a lot of them on the bottom, trying to hide down there. There must be 200 or 300 sandflies in this trap.
But the real surprise for Jean-Charles isn't so much the number of insects captured. It's that, despite their tiny size, he thinks that he's just made a new discovery.
It seems like a strictly local species, particular only to this area. It would be interesting to know the range it occupies, how far north, how far south in Brazil, how far does it extend.
For a parasitologist, this potential discovery is important. It's been 30 years since a new species of sandfly was discovered in Guyana. And in spite of all his experience, the idea of confirming this find is very exciting to Jean-Charles.
In the laboratory, we'll separate the male from the female sandflies. Then, using various techniques, part of them will be preserved for molecular biological analysis. And then we'll always look for new species that may have gone completely unnoticed and may have been for millions of years. Leishmaniasis is not the only disease that this tiny Amazonian sandfly can transmit. We found that it carries a number of viruses. For the time being, none of these viruses infect man, but they do infect each other. So they're the kind of insects that are very important to learn about. But they discourage a lot of people because they're so tiny to study. They're 3 times smaller than the smallest mosquito, not larger than 2 millimeters. And they have to be hunted under conditions that are often difficult. You have to be a real sandfly hunter to capture them.
Meanwhile, Hugues Contamin studies the frogs in his traps, because even if they're not the virus carriers that he's looking for, these animals will interest other scientists. One doesn't have access to a place like this very often.
I'm going to remove this frog's liver for genetic study. I'll put it in alcohol. The analysis is done on the liver. We'll extract DNA, and then we can do a molecular analysis, the DNA sequencing, to determine which family or families this frog belongs to. In addition, we conserve the body and do a morphological description. In this context, I am working for other scientists who weren't able to join us here. So I take advantage of these traps to collect as many specimens as possible. Depending on the species, the animal groups, they're sent to different specialists. People in the CNRS, Center for National Research, the Museum of Natural History, they're delighted that we can do this for them, because it's not every day we can get to a place like this. There aren't many people as masochistic as we are, coming here to get eaten alive by insects, to have their feet scratched to pieces. It's the price you pay for this adventure, learning new things, being part of something really interesting, innovative, and what could be or will be of great use. But I have to admit that right now, the going is tough.
Around the perimeter of Boundary Mark 1, Gerald Mijon is on another kind of hunt. The archaeologist inspects the forest and the caves around for signs of past human life. If prior to the bacterial shock of colonization there were many tens of thousands of Indians, it should be possible to find traces of them, even in such remote areas.
Look, there. Here, look at this piece. Look, there's a design on the bottom.
It's the rim of a plate.
I'm watching where I put my feet. There's so many of them. Here, there's one again.
If there's a manioc plate, it means they cultivated manioc. That's already of some interest. It confirms that these Inselbergs and the shelters near the top were inhabited. That's all that can be said. The vegetal remains aren't conserved. And the surface here doesn't correspond at all to what was here originally. There's a lot of material that's crumbled from above. We'll have to clear away a lot of it to understand what the original surface was like. This rock pile is certainly strange.
Up to this point in the expedition, the scientists already have some promising results. Only Hugues Contamin is still impatiently waiting to capture his first rodents or bats. After 3 days, there is still nothing.
C'est avant tout une grosse émotion.
First and foremost, it's a very moving experience to be here, in the middle of the tropical forest, the lungs of the planet that we talk so much about, that is so threatened. This is where we come from, not from anywhere else. We are a part of nature, part of this great chain, and we must learn to live in harmony with all this.
At the top of boundary marker 1, the entomologist is hard at work. He's preparing his night trap before darkness falls. Thanks to this trap, Jean-Philippe doesn't have to chase insects with his butterfly net. All he has to do is wait until interesting specimens land on the covering.
The night trap is based on the attraction of light. There's a theory that insects move at a certain angle respective to the moon. So instead of using the moon as a sightline, they use the light in the trap. And in a kind of spiraling effect, they end up at the light. It's obvious to anyone. On the porch at night, there are often insects circling the light bulbs. It's exactly the same principle we use here in the forest.
Jean-Philippe gets ready to spend the night watching over his traps. As the hours pass, different families of insects become active, and he doesn't want to miss any of them. Sometimes this way, due to a lucky capture, a new species is discovered.
Here there's a huge amount of insects that I've never seen. Even though I've done a lot of this kind of trapping in Guyana, I'm happy to say there's really a lot that's new to me. So maybe these insects are only particular to this area. They'll have to be identified before we can know more.
Thanks to the discoveries made in these isolated zones, perhaps one day new molecules will be found that can be used in medicines. This is one of the objectives of entomologists. But the other interest in this type of research is that finally, we don't know a lot about the infinite world of insects, and there is an urgent need to know the vectors of potential illnesses. Because even if man succeeds in controlling deforestation and prevents the emergence of new viruses, nothing can be done about another phenomenon that is on the rise.
There are many diseases that are transmitted by insects. But with increased global warming, these diseases are going to spread as the habitat changes. We'll find illnesses in Europe that never existed before, that were only found in tropical countries.
By changing the environment of the planet, man has put himself in danger. In the world today, research centers addressing these new threats are multiplying. In Guyana, since the summer of 2006, a new program has been initiated called REAU, the emergence and re-emergence of infectious diseases in the Amazon basin. Financed by the National Research Agency, the aim of this program is to study epidemic systems. Scientific expeditions led into the heart of tropical forests are an essential complement to these programs, because better knowledge of microscopic biodiversity gives the best chance of developing new remedies and leads to a better understanding of the life cycles of the parasites and viruses that threaten us. A week later, Hugues still hasn't come up with a single rodent. So 2 days ago, he put a net at the entrance of a cave. Thanks to this trap, he hopes to eventually find some viruses.
The best known virus that can be carried by bats is the rabies virus. There are other families of viruses that are also transmitted by bats. Viruses that were found in Asia about a decade ago. Emerging viruses that belong to the same family that causes measles. And that have also caused small epidemics, deadly epidemics, but localized in a particular region. So it's clear that we should target our research, especially on those categories of viruses, and see what's circulating here, if there actually is anything. Now I'm going to anesthetize the animals. It's a huge dose of anesthetic. The animals go to sleep, but of course they don't wake up.
Hugues kills the bat in order to do many different analyses. These he carries out on the spot, and in order to have the best chance of isolating an eventual microorganism, he puts the blood sample on a very special kind of paper.
It's an absorbent blotting paper that is treated with a product which inactivates the virus. So if I take them back to France or even to Cayenne, there's no risk. If there are viruses, they will all have been inactivated.
To detect the presence of a virus, Hugues Contamin will look for traces of DNA left in the blood sample that he has just taken. This will be done in a laboratory, following well-established procedures.
We always look for a virus related to the viruses we know, the main virus families that we know. On the other hand, we might identify a new species or subspecies, and we can call it a new virus. What we're looking for is something new in the rabies family of viruses. If that's the case, or in the paramyxovirus family, the virus that causes measles. I'm taking a little piece of wing.
Until now, the microorganisms that worry the World Health Organization and the scientific community come mostly from Africa and Asia. AIDS, SARS, and Ebola came out of the virgin forests of these continents. But the Amazon also has its share of viruses. And as deforestation progresses, here too, new hemorrhagic fevers appear.
In different countries in South America, we've discovered viruses that are related to the virus that causes hemorrhagic fevers. And that emerged among the population after deforestation and farming in forest zones newly exploited by man. There have been cases in Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, and Bolivia. Man comes into contact with these reservoirs of viruses, and the virus jumps to man.
Returning to base camp, Hugues examines the first samples under a microscope. It's time for the first analysis, the first results. For the time being, the results aren't what he'd hoped for. But it's true that finding a new strain of virus in such a vast forest isn't easy. For Jean-Charles, on the other hand, the results are more positive. He's exceeded his objective by capturing almost 15,000 sandflies. And above all, he has confirmed the existence of a new species in this part of the forest.
Wonderful little creatures, so tiny, much smaller than the smallest mosquito. They're there, and no matter what we do, we're not going to get rid of them. They're not going to budge. They were here before us, and they use extraordinary ecological niches to survive. Sandflies do absolutely what they want, and the parasites do exactly what they want with the sandflies, and there's no way around that. The only weapon is the knowledge that will prevent man from moving into these areas
de s'installer dans les zones où il est présent.
Because it's certain that he'll be infected.
C'est sûr qu'il court à la contamination.
By inhabiting these forests, man not only runs the risk of catching new diseases, he also destroys whole strata of biodiversity and lessens the chances of finding new medicines. Because in the heart of the forest, there are also remedies. By studying some of the insects brought back by Jean-Philippe, scientists have already found numerous unknown molecules that may one day be put to therapeutic use. But today's war against the risk of epidemics remains urgent. In France, the National Institute of Sanitary Control oversees the emergence of suspected cases of infectious diseases. In case of a pandemic, everything is ready, including decontamination centers to isolate the infected. The emergency plan even anticipates a close collaboration between emergency services and the Army. Today, much has been done to mitigate the consequences of the next great viral attack. The expeditions like this one are still too rare, and we still don't know much about the life cycles of microorganisms, a world both invisible and infinite.
Viruses, microorganisms, there's all kinds of them. There's a microdiversity. There's as much diversity as in insects, trees, flowers. But we have to be realistic. We can never hope to totally eradicate these viruses. Our goal has to be to live in harmony with them, to have effective treatments. When we go to these areas to discover what is potentially out there, we can tell everybody to be careful about deforestation, to be careful about humans settling in these zones. Because although perhaps the greatest remedies exist here, so do the greatest dangers.